sacrifices because I wanted everybody else who I loved and that I had around me, whether they were family, whether they were friends, whether they were simply people who lived in the same country I did, I wanted them to enjoy the same things, that we've always had going forward, that we are beginning to see come increasingly under threat. So yeah, I mean, things as simple as having my old beat-up car, there's a lot to miss. It's a great country.
I wondered, after realizing from watching Citizen4 that you had to take off without telling your significant other, Lindsay Mills, that you would not be seeing her possibly for the rest of your life. When you did get back together, was she mad?
I'll leave that to the investigative journalists to see if they can puzzle that one out.
Come on, just a...
Yes, she was not entirely pleased, but at the same time, it was an incredible reunion because she understood, and that meant a lot to me. So many people from so many parts of society, they go, they may not agree with everything that I did, they may not agree with the way I did it, but they do agree with the principle. They believe that in America, government answers to the public. And when that changes, it's no longer America. So, although she had a very, very challenging year, and I'll leave it to her to discuss that when and if she's ever ready, it was a meeting I'll never forget.
And can you imagine possibly staying in Russia forever?
I'll do what needs to be done to continue my work. At this point, the issues have so vastly overshadowed what I do that I feel like I have a lot more flexibility. I have a lot of disagreements with the policy of the Russian government. I think they do some horrible, atrocious things, particularly when it comes to the right to privacy and the manner in which they go about surveillance, the extent they do that, and the way we see that affecting journalism and public opinion. But ultimately, I answer to my country, and the way things go, the policies of my government. Maybe one day, if I speak fluent Russian, I know everything about Russian society and their politics, I'll be able to engage more fully. But my first duty is my own people.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one other question, and then maybe go to the ones from the people in the audience. I wondered, as just because of the choices you made were so unusual, to stand up and take these risks. Was there anything in your childhood or growing up that inspired you to do this? I mean, were there models in mind, or even your own family, or what was it, do you think, that made you separate yourself from everyone else who just kind of keeps going ahead without doing these things?
I think nobody really knows. None of us are masters of our own psychology. We don't know what shaped us. We don't know what drove us to make the decisions that we made. But my entire family worked for the federal government, going back to grandparents and things like that, and particularly in the military. I signed up for the Army in the wake of September 11th and volunteered to participate in the Iraq War because I believed the claims of our government. And that was something that I think was uniform throughout my family. So as I became more and more senior, as I climbed up through the ranks, as I joined the CIA, as I later worked for the NSA, and I gained access to the absolute highest levels of classification, and I realized that anybody, could use these programs, that they had extraordinary capabilities, that nobody knew about them for the public, that they had not been authorized by the public. And the fact that really pushed me over the edge was that the officials in government that did know about this, were willing to directly lie to the public about it. It showed to me that they were not acting in a manner consistent with the government that the principles that I and my family and everyone else in this country swore their loyalty to. If they're going to ask us to pledge allegiance to the flag every day in school, they had better hold themselves to the principles that the flag represents. Because if they don't, they're asking for trouble.
Well, I guess they got it. Okay, I'm going to read you a couple of questions from the audience. Some people left their names and some did not. This is a question from someone named Ellen Corso, and she says, in true New Yorker festival style, I do not actually have a question. I would like to tell you something. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did, and thank you for your sacrifice, and I really appreciate it, and I think that you are a hero. And I hope that you are able to find refuge in a more pleasant spot soon. But then she says, but maybe I do have a question. How are you supporting yourself?
So I've been incredibly fortunate to have support from so many people from around the world, whether they're civil liberties organizations, whether they're private individuals, whether it's crowdsourcing donations for my defense funds and things like that. I'm actually working on a very significant grant to work for a foundation creating, I don't know how much I should reveal at this point, because I think they'd prefer to do it. But to work for the benefit of the press and journalists who are working in threatened areas. And by threatened areas, I don't mean just, the James Rosens who are getting their phone records subpoenaed by the Department of Justice. I mean people, in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean people in regimes where journalists get shot. They don't get indicted. How they can continue their work. And it's been incredibly rewarding. I'll leave it at that. And if I could actually respond to she called me a hero, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate the support that everyone's given me, but I think it's important that we remember that I'm an ordinary guy. I'm not a hero, and I would argue that there are no heroes. There are people who do heroic things, but when we begin to label people as heroes, what we're doing is we're otherizing them, we're elevating them, we're putting them on a pedestal and saying they're different. I could never do that. But the reality is you can do that. We can all do that. We all have a line. There's a measure of incivility and inhumanity that we all can tolerate, and then there's one step beyond it that we cannot. And all we have to do is recognize where that line is, recognize what we believe, and commit ourselves not just to believing in it, but to standing for it when it comes under threat.
Thank you. Okay, from Ariana Marini. She says, a great deal of discussion has gone on about whether you did the right or wrong thing, Mr. Snowden. At my college, we had a 3-hour panel discussion regarding whether you are a hero or a traitor. Do you ever regret leaking the NSA documents?
No, I have not regretted it at all. I think, in fact, what has happened since has shown us that it was critical to do, and that had I not done it personally, someone else would have. The question was not, would this be revealed, but when would it be revealed? The public had to know about this. And there were, I know for a fact from my internal discussions where I told colleagues, do you see what's going on? Do you know what's going on here? How do you feel about this? And they were appalled. They thought the same thing. When they saw the boundless informant heat map of the NSA's global collection that shows how much we're collecting, in what areas, how many communications we're intercepting on Americans, on Germans, on Russians, and so on and so forth, which, by the way, the NSA told Congress it did not have that capability and could not do it, even though the tool was available to anyone with a top-secret clearance on the NSA's network. When they saw that, and they looked at the statistics, and they saw that we were collecting and intercepting and monitoring more American communications than we were Russian communications. People go, where did we misplace our priorities? Why is this happening? So I don't think as controversial as some commentators in the media have made it out to be. A lot of what we've seen in the last year has been opinion shaping. We've had a lot of very senior officials going up on Sunday shows, giving anonymous comments to the press, trying to say, hey, this causes damage, this causes damage, this causes damage. But we've had court cases, we've had independent review boards, which were appointed by the White House, right? They're not appointing adversaries here; they're appointing partners, and people who have gone before Congress. These officials have been trotted out, and despite full access to classified information, not something we're not talking about situations where they've gone, we can't tell you about it because if we made it public, it would cause harm, and they've been asked, has this caused any individual instance of harm at all? Can you give us one example of where this hurt things? And they've never been able to show that. So the question is, if this was so damaging, and the government has every incentive to show us and to make the case, to get the public instead to back these programs instead of condemn them, and to get us to give up more of our rights to make these programs more capable, more efficient, why have they not done so? And the reality is because it hasn't happened. We have been incredibly careful, and by we I mean myself, I mean the journalists, I mean all of the people involved in the review, including the government itself. Because every story that's appeared in the newspaper, the government has had a chance to review, provide comment on, and say, look, this goes too far, this is going to cause harm. And every story that you've read in the paper is there because the government said, you know, ultimately we're not going to like this, but it's not going to hurt anything.
Okay, this is from Jennifer Chow, and she says, what are your suggestions for how people can protect themselves and their privacy?
So this is this is an incredibly complex topic, and because I understand this on a technical level, you know, I could talk for the next 9 hours about this, and everybody would fall asleep and hate me. But the basic principles are, first off, we have to champion reform domestically and go, when we say, you know, I don't worry about this, I don't have anything to hide, so I'm not afraid of them, you know, reading my emails and collecting all of the books I read at Amazon, seeing all of my friends and when I call them and where I go and what I do. Because what you're saying with this is you're inverting the model of responsibility for how rights work. When you say, I have nothing to hide, you're saying, I don't care about this right. You're saying, I don't have this right because I've got to the point where I have to justify it. The way rights work is the government has to justify its intrusion into your rights. You don't have to justify why you need freedom of speech. You don't have to justify why you need the right to be left alone without any kind of reasonable suspicion or probable cause. So we have to establish that. We have to say that we value our rights, and the same rights that we inherited, our children deserve to inherit the same way. But ultimately, we have to remember that political reform in the United States is not going to solve the problem globally, because governments around the world, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in Asia, they're going to have their own national laws. And that's, you know, these can be terrible governments where they go, we don't care about your rights. We're going to intercept everything we can. So because of that, you have to use secure communications. And that's a very complex technical topic. But the real key is companies that are willing to collaborate with any government to compromise the security of their products and services do not deserve to be trusted with your data. Because if they'll do it for one government, they'll do it for another government. And governments don't play by the same rules. They, in fact, have to. Because if a government makes an exception for the United States government, they'll have to do the same thing for the Indian government, the Chinese government, the Russian government, the French government. Otherwise, they'll be sanctioned in that country. You know, they'll face some kind of response. They won't be able to get licensed. They won't get regulatory approvals. So when we see things that we've recently seen where senior officials in government, you know, the FBI director or the attorney general come out and they say, oh my goodness, Apple is saying they're going to increase the security of their phones. We can't allow that. We want to basically mandate that they're going to have to compromise their security of their devices. That has incredible knock-on effects, not just for Apple, but for the country. Because the same way that nobody's going to put their money in a bank that's most famous for stealing from its clients, nobody's going to buy phones from a company that compromises the security of them so they can be eavesdropped on, particularly when we talk about a global economy. No German is going to buy an American phone with a back door in it that allows anybody to listen in, when they can buy a Korean phone or a German phone that does the same exact thing but is actually secure. So that's going to cost us jobs if we don't do anything about it. That's going to cost us economic competitiveness, and that's really going to have a knock-on effect. So you've got to support secure products and services, but you also have to recognize that some of the technologies that we need have not been developed, they have not been popularized, they have not been made easy to use. And you need to support efforts and research into those. I speak with cryptographers and computer scientists every day to try to figure out how we can create solutions to the metadata problem, which is the fact that signaling information, who you called, when you called, then what websites you visited.